Ford built 859 Mustangs with an engine that had no business being in a street car. The Boss 429 wasn't designed for red lights or highway cruising. It was a NASCAR racing engine that Ford needed to homologate for the track. To make it legal, they had to sell it to the public, even though it was completely impractical for street use. This is the story of how NASCAR rules forced Ford to create one of the most legendary Mustangs ever built, and why collectors will pay over $500,000 for one today. In 1968, Ford had a problem. Their new 429 cubic inch engine was dominating NASCAR development testing, posting lap times that embarrassed Chrysler's 426 Hemi. But NASCAR had a rule. Any engine used in competition had to be available in a production car that consumers could buy. You couldn't just build a race engine and use it, you had to sell it to the public first. This rule was designed to keep racing connected to production vehicles. If an automaker wanted to campaign an engine in NASCAR, they had to prove it was a legitimate production power plant by installing it in at least 500 street cars. This process was called homologation. Ford needed to homologate their 429 for NASCAR. The problem was finding a car to put it in. The 429 was massive. With its Hemi-style combustion chambers and enormous cylinder heads, the engine was physically larger than anything Ford had built for passenger cars. It wouldn't fit in a Mustang's engine bay without major modifications. The shock towers, the structural supports for the front suspension, were in the way. The engine was too wide. Ford's engineers looked at their full-size cars, the Galaxy and LTD, but those weren't performance vehicles. NASCAR wanted to see the engine in a car that made sense as a performance machine. Putting a NASCAR engine in a luxury sedan wouldn't satisfy the homologation requirement spirit, even if it met the letter of the rule. That left the Mustang. It was Ford's performance flagship, the car that represented Ford's commitment to power and speed. If Ford was serious about the 429 being a production performance engine, it had to go in the Mustang. The problem remained, it didn't fit. Ford's solution was radical. They contracted with Kar Kraft, a specialty vehicle company in Michigan that had built Ford's GT40 race cars. Kar Kraft would receive brand new Mustang sports roof bodies from Ford's assembly line, then completely rework the front suspension and engine bay to accept the 429. The process was extensive. Kar Kraft cut away the Mustang's shock towers and rebuilt them further apart. They relocated the battery to the trunk to make room for the engine. They installed a severe-duty suspension with heavy-duty springs and shocks. They added power front disc brakes because the standard Mustang brakes couldn't handle the car's new performance potential. Each conversion took substantial time and labor. This wasn't a production line process. It was semi-custom fabrication on every single car. The costs were enormous, but Ford had no choice. NASCAR wanted 500 homologated cars, so Ford would build them. The engine that went into these modified Mustangs was unlike anything available in other Ford products. The Boss 429 used aluminum cylinder heads with crescent-shaped combustion chambers, a Hemi design similar to Chrysler's legendary engine. But Ford's approach was different. Where Chrysler's Hemi used a shallow valve angle, Ford's 429 used a deeper angle that allowed better breathing at high RPM. Ford rated the engine at 375 horsepower, the same rating they gave the 428 Cobra Jet. This was obviously conservative. The Boss 429 was a far more sophisticated and powerful engine. The truth was, Ford didn't want to advertise the real horsepower numbers because insurance companies were already punishing muscle car owners with massive premiums. A 450 horsepower rating would have made the car uninsurable for most buyers. The engine's real party trick was its racing potential. In NASCAR trim, the 429 was making over 600 horsepower. The street version was deliberately detuned with a mild camshaft, restrictive exhaust, and conservative carburation. But the foundation was there. The aluminum heads, the strong bottom end, the excellent breathing. Removing the restrictions would reveal the engine's true capability. Ford produced Boss 429 Mustangs in two model years, 1969 and 1970. The first year saw 859 units built, easily exceeding NASCAR's 500-car minimum. The 1970 models added hood scoops and revised graphics, but mechanically remained similar. Total production across both years reached 1,359 cars. Every Boss 429 received special identification. The cars wore unique graphics, special badging, and came in specific colors. Ford offered the Boss 429 only in sports roof body style, the fastback Mustang. No convertibles, no hardtops. The car was built for one purpose: homologate the engine for NASCAR. Pricing reflected the car's specialized nature. The Boss 429 cost about $4,900 in 1969, roughly $1,500 more than a Boss 302 Mustang and nearly double what you'd pay for a base Mustang. That extra cost covered Kar Kraft's conversion work and the sophisticated engine. You were paying for NASCAR technology in street car form. As a street car, the Boss 429 had significant compromises. The engine's conservative tune made it feel less responsive than the smaller 428 Cobra Jet at low RPM. The 429 was built for high-speed NASCAR racing, where engines stayed above 5,000 RPM for hours. At street speeds, the engine felt lazy and underwhelming. The car's handling suffered from the engine's massive weight. Despite Kar Kraft's suspension upgrades, the Boss 429 pushed through corners with noticeable understeer. The weight distribution heavily favored the front end, making the car feel nose-heavy compared to the nimble Boss 302. Fuel economy was predictably terrible. Most owners reported single-digit miles per gallon in city driving. The engine's large displacement and conservative tune meant it consumed fuel at an alarming rate without delivering the dramatic acceleration you'd expect from a 429 cubic inch V8. But none of that mattered to Ford. The Boss 429 wasn't built to be the best street car. It was built to go NASCAR racing. On NASCAR tracks, the 429 proved its worth. Ford teams campaigned the engine throughout 1969 and 1970. Competing directly against Chrysler's Hemi and Chevrolet's big blocks. The 429's aluminum heads gave it a weight advantage over Chrysler's cast-iron Hemi heads. The engine's breathing capability allowed it to make power at the high RPM ranges NASCAR racing demanded. David Pearson drove a 429-powered Ford Torino to the 1969 NASCAR Championship. He won 11 races that season, demonstrating that Ford's investment in the engine had paid off. The Boss 429 street cars might have been compromised, but the racing program was successful. Cale Yarborough, Donnie Allison, and other Ford drivers campaigned 429-powered cars throughout the engine's NASCAR career. The combination proved competitive against anything Chrysler or Chevrolet could field. Ford had achieved what they set out to do: build a winning NASCAR engine. The street Boss 429 Mustangs quietly disappeared after 1970. Ford had fulfilled their homologation requirements, and continuing production made no financial sense. Each car lost money. The Kar Kraft conversion costs exceeded what Ford could charge without making the car impossibly expensive. But Ford's racing program continued. The 429 remained competitive in NASCAR through the early 1970s until rule changes and insurance industry pressure began killing off big displacement engines. By 1972, the muscle car era was ending, and the Boss 429's brief production run became a historical footnote. For years, Boss 429 Mustangs were simply expensive used cars. Collectors recognized their rarity but questioned their street performance. The 428 Cobra Jet cars felt faster in daily driving. The Boss 302 handled better and revved more freely. The Boss 429 seemed like an expensive compromise without a clear advantage. That perception changed as collectors began understanding the car's purpose and rarity. These weren't intended as street performance machines. They were homologation specials built to satisfy NASCAR rules. The car's compromises made sense when viewed through that lens. You weren't buying a street racer, you were buying a piece of NASCAR history that happened to have a license plate. Values began climbing in the 1990s as muscle car collecting matured. A Boss 429 that sold for $15,000 in 1985 was worth $50,000 by 1995. By 2010, exceptional examples were bringing $200,000 at auction. Today, the best Boss 429 Mustangs regularly sell for over $500,000. The car's value isn't just about rarity, though only 1,359 were built. It's about what the car represents. Ford's commitment to NASCAR racing, the lengths manufacturers would go to compete, and the brief moment when racing homologation rules forced exotic racing engines into street cars. Looking at a Boss 429 today, you see all the evidence of its purpose. The relocated shock towers show where Kar Kraft had to cut and rework the structure. The trunk-mounted battery reveals the desperate search for engine bay space. The massive engine, barely fitting under the hood, explains why Ford needed Kar Kraft's expertise. These weren't conventional muscle cars built on assembly lines. They were semi-custom racing specials built one at a time by skilled fabricators. Every Boss 429 required cutting, welding, fitting, and modifying. The result was a street-legal NASCAR engine in Mustang form. Impractical, expensive, and absolutely legendary. Ford built the Boss 429 because NASCAR's rules left them no choice. They needed to homologate a racing engine, so they found a way to stuff it into their performance flagship. The car that resulted was compromised as a street machine, but perfect as a homologation special. That's why collectors chase them today, not despite their compromises, but because of them. The Boss 429 is proof that sometimes the best automotive legends come from racing requirements, forcing engineers to do something completely impractical. NASCAR wanted 500 street cars. Ford built them, and in the process, they created one of the most valuable Mustangs ever made.